things, and most departments have abided by that. And based on projections that we're looking at currently, I've decided that at least at this point, as of September 1st of this year, department heads would be able to start the process of filling vacant positions if they have any. So just want to send out thanks to all the departments that have really kept a close eye on budgets this year with all the uncertainty that we have going on. So unless there are any questions specifically on any of the department budgets, that concludes my report.
Are there any questions? I have one question that's related, but not directly related to the financial report. But I wonder if you could comment briefly on the state of our state of the emergency as a result of the flood we had last week, and Chairman Peterson's actions, and how that relates to public safety and anything we might need to consider as a committee.
The chairman of the board, I believe on Monday, signed a declaration of emergency, declaring a state of emergency due to flooding. And the highway commissioner and the sheriff's office have been working closely in coordinating our response to that effort. The sheriff may include a few words in his report, but we've had several county roads and some state roads that were impacted by the flooding. I believe the commissioner told us yesterday that all county trunk highways are now open, but there are still some town roads that they're still working on. But I think most of the damage that was done, we've inventoried it, kept track of it. If there is an effort by the state to declare an emergency, and I'm not sure if there will be, but our state representatives have been notified of this, and a couple of them have reached out and asked if they can help in that effort. We would appreciate that, and that would open up possibly some state relief if that comes to be. But the chairman did sign a declaration earlier this week, which will allow for that to occur.
Sorry. Any other questions, Supervisor Burney?
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Pat, I got a question for you because I don't really know how this works. In the case of a disaster such as my house gets flooded, as long as I have flood insurance, we're good. How does this work with roads? Are we going to some sort of emergency fund to repair these? How does this, do we have an insurance policy against, acts of God or whatever you want to call it?
I'll let Ken speak to the insurance issue as our risk manager, but the highway commissioner has to utilize existing budget dollars, and he will that will have an impact on projects throughout the course of the year because of the fact that they had to provide materials and equipment, manpower, labor to repair the damage. So we utilized existing budget dollars to make those repairs. And if there is no reimbursement from the state, potentially the county board may be asked to supplement that budget, but at this point I don't anticipate that to occur. So we'll absorb it. Ken, insurance-wise?
We don't carry flood insurance on the roads. Yep.
One other question, if that's okay. So you said September 1st was determined to allow filling vacancies. How was that date determined?
Ken and I looked at projections, and we feel comfortable that where things stand, at least now, that we would be able to allow that process to start to occur. And I don't have I don't know if we kept track of how many positions. I think HR probably could provide that to us, actually how many positions we did hold up on, but there were probably several.
When we started looking too at the requests that were coming in saying, hey, could I get a variance to that? Because, I have a need, it's coming up. So we were starting to get quite a few of those. So really, when we looked at the numbers in total, it looks like we're going to do okay for 2020, especially with all the grant money that's coming in now for us. So looking at the request, we just sort of timed, well, if we can hold it till September 1, we can realize those gains of holding those positions and still meet the needs that the departments have for staffing to finish out the year.
If there are no other questions, we'll move to the second item on the agenda, the review of capital improvements projects. Mr. Witt?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The capital improvements, it goes through several stages. We have a couple of new supervisors, so I'll just quickly go over what those stages are. The department heads make the request. It goes to a KIP team that sort of looks at it and places it into the KIP project plan. We then come to the departments, the 5 standing committees, to look at your projects that you would have jurisdiction over to sort of get your buy-in that you agree with it also. Then it will go to a committee of the whole for them to review and really weigh in on, and then a final resolution to the county board to adopt the 5-year KIP plan. And really, you're adopting the next year because the future years are all changeable, and they do frequently change. So what we're looking at, though, are the highlighted sections of the KIP plan. These are the sections that apply directly to this standing committee. These projects involve building improvements that are public safety related, a Lodox machine that's budgeted for 2021. We have circuit court equipment projected out several years, which is sort of the second phase for court improvements. Copy machines in the DA and the circuit court and the clerk of court. And then we have law enforcement. We have some reoccurring costs that happen with law enforcement, with squad cars. They come up every year. They also have different things that come up, like an evidence storage unit that they have planned a few years out. And then the emergency communications. They have reoccurring needs that come up. One of the big ones is the comm van that's been put off for several years. That is on the fiscal year 21 budget coming up. And they have a couple of new projects, network switches and portable radio cache updates, which I'm not really sure what those are, but Terry tells me those are important things to have for emergency communications. So they made it onto the KIP plan. So if you have questions about specific projects, now's kind of your first chance to ask those questions so you can learn a little bit more about it from the respective department head that asked for these. And then really the fiscal year 21 is the one that is planned to be funded for next year. So those are the ones that we'll focus on the further into the process that we get.
But just as a reminder, these are, this is what is in the KIP request as it stands today.
Yep, where we're at in the process is department has requested, the KIP team is evaluated, placed on the 5-year plan. We're getting your first feedback now. This is your first chance to see what the projects are that are coming up over the next 5 years.
And then Ken walk them through where the end of the process.
Yeah.
Kind of see it through.
Well, after the committee of the whole, or we'll ask for more input from the county board. We'll actually ask you to sort of vote up or down the individual projects that are coming up. We'll move that to a resolution. That resolution is really authorizing that next year of KIP to be in the budget. So when you approve the resolution for the 5-year KIP, I'm going to place the fiscal year 21 items in the budget to be spent. So that's sort of you telling me at that point that, yes, we want to spend the money on those projects. But those are the next 2 steps after today's.
May I ask a question?
Of course. Is that Supervisor Hanson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm curious about how the grants in this area play into our funding. do we have any grant sensitive or recurring grant sensitive items on the KIP here, and how do they look with regard to what we're seeing on the screen here?
Yeah, so there's 2 grants that are planned as revenue sources related to public safety projects. One of them is one that actually occurred 2 years ago. It was the funding of the patrol boat, but the DNR reimburses us over the following 5 years. So we still have 3 years. It's project 10058. I sort of highlighted it right there. It's very tiny, but it's on there. That's $25,000 coming back into the KIP. So that's a cash inflow coming back into the KIP for a grant for a prior expense. So we show the revenue coming back where the expense came from. And then the other one was the Lodox machine. So project 10087 has a planned $250,000 grant, which is 50% of the project cost for the Lodox. I would say that the project is contingent on getting the grant. So we'll apply for a grant. If we don't get the grant, we won't move forward with that project until we're able to acquire the grant then.
Are there any other questions on the KIP? If there are no other questions, we'll move to the CJCC Council and Subcommittee updates, and I'll call on Judge Nordstrom, and then I'll call on Mr. O'Keefe for a report on update on the courts generally and CJCC.
So I'll rely on Mike to cover the various subcommittees of CJCC. Obviously, there's been somewhat limited activity, I think, based upon focusing on COVID-19. What I'd like to do today, from a court's point of view, is talk about some of the projects that we've been undergoing and the process we've been undergoing to get from where we were in sort of a shutdown or a semi-shutdown of various functions of the courts to back to operations in a little different way. So first of all, as you may recall from my last report to various committees, we were under the instructions and orders from the Supreme Court in various ways to limit our activities. And we had set up and have successfully set up the use of Zoom technology to conduct many court hearings, and I think it's gone very well. You'll hear different views by different judges. So from this judge, it went fairly well. I think there's, it's a learning curve, and we've all had our frustrations, but nonetheless, it's been a very good tool. It was provided to us through the state court system, gave us the licenses, et cetera, and then we've gotten the equipment to use it through the county, and that's all been very helpful. As an ongoing matter, I think what we were looking at as part of our capital project, the $300,000 that's presently budgeted for capital improvements, was to try to accomplish some of the things that were accomplished in very short order in terms of video technology, bringing telephone communication into our existing systems in the courtroom. Well, that's actually been accomplished through this process and the use of Zoom. So that actually will save us a bit of money on the back end because we won't have to buy the technology to accomplish at least the telephone connection. And basically anybody who's got a Zoom connection can now connect up to the court system. I can tell you I've seen defendants and others in very unusual places during this process. Lots of attorneys in cars, and I occasionally have to make sure that they're not driving, not so much the attorneys as the defendants, but anyway, it's a curious process, but it's worked to keep people out of the courthouse and the government center over the long term, or over the short term. So we were under an order to conduct, for the most part, remote hearings, and we were under an order to not conduct jury trials. That's changed now because the Supreme Court issued an order some weeks ago that instructed each county to develop a plan to go back to some level of normalcy, including conducting jury trials. We had a group here in St. Croix County, a lot of every stakeholder involved in the justice process, both civil and criminal, participated, and we came up with a plan. The order required us, that is the Supreme Court order, required us to submit it to our chief judge, Judge Boyle in Barron County. She approved our plan, and so now we're in operation. So what does that look like? Today, under our new plan, we still conduct remote hearings when we can, because we want to limit the number of people in the courthouse. It's really up to the judge primarily to figure out which of the hearings they want people in person for or not. But, for example, if we're taking evidence in court, we generally have them now in person, witnesses in person, et cetera, where we were doing them remotely before. And pleas and sentencings in criminal cases we're doing in person now. And so that's a big improvement. That was always a challenge, and that's much better. So we have transitioned to do that. We've got social distancing. We've got signs everywhere about hand sanitizers, and I can't say enough about Jim Ellsbury and his team from facilities in terms of managing, keeping things clean. And I'll get to the project that we've undergone too in a moment. But his staff has done a great job. I mean, I see the cleaning staff coming in and out of the courtroom between hearings all day long, and that's very comforting. So that's been helpful. So in terms of transitioning on in-court hearings, we have some people in court. When they're in court, the one rule we have is everyone has to wear a mask. That's non-negotiable. That's directly from the Chief Justice. Masks at all times, except for the witness if the parties agree. And we've placed, and I'll get to some of the changes that we've made in the courtroom. And in every courtroom now, in the witness box, there's a plexiglass shield separating the witness from the rest of the courtroom. And that facilitates some safety when they do take their mask off to testify. We also have a shield in front of the clerk. We didn't decide to put a shield in front of the judge. So apparently elevation and distance was sufficient, we thought. And so those are the two shields that we've added. We've taken benches out of all of the courtrooms, some benches, so that there's less benches in each courtroom. Socially distanced, we can have about 18 people in the courtroom, and that's it. And we have stickers that show where to sit, and that's all very well organized as well. And that's for every courtroom. And now there's my courtroom. We needed a courtroom where we could conduct jury trials. And so our decision was, and our plan was, that was approved, was all jury trials going forward for the foreseeable future will be conducted in Branch 1 in my courtroom. And Jim and his team went through a project of reconfiguring the jury box. I encourage you all to come up and take a look. It's quite a thing. I suspect there is no other jury box like this in all of Wisconsin, perhaps in all of the Midwest. In any case, it's a first-class jury box now because there's almost 6 feet distance between each seat. So we're going to have masks plus distance for jurors, and it's a big jury box. We're also going to have a shield between the jury box and the gallery that's still in process. So what that means is all the jury trials have to be in my courtroom. So I'm assuming I'll be given some small cart to take my things around from other courtrooms as other judges come and go for jury trials. But in any case, we are now stacking all jury trials into courtroom 1. And we've started that process. We are officially open for jury trials as of July 1. We don't have any on the calendar now until July 13. We did have some, but they resolved. So that's been good. So July 13, I think, may be our first jury trial, 3-day jury trial, if it doesn't resolve. And then we look ahead month to month, and we see the stack of potential trials on each day. We're not really organizing this ahead of time. Each judge sets their own calendar, and then Judge Needham, as the presiding judge under our order, determines the priority. And then there's just listed on a list, and if that one resolves, then it's the next one. And the other one last thing I'll mention with regard to our process is that all jury trials need to be resolved 14 days before trial. And so that requires that the attorneys, after 14 days, because of the need to use the space to conduct jury trials and to not get down to the day before, and then we've got 3 days of empty space in a jury in courtroom 1 that we could have used for a jury trial. 14 days ahead, it has to either be, there has to be a resolution, and if not, then after that time, the only available options for the parties, absent extraordinary circumstances, are to plead to all the charges, or to have the case dismissed, or, worst case scenario, face sanctions from the judge in that case. So that's our process. I encourage everybody to come upstairs. I know I've gone on a little long here, but I think it's important to pass on all the progress that we've made, and it's been, you know, to some degree based upon the judge's work, particularly Judge Needham. Judge Needham did a lot of work in organizing all of this process through these orders that we went through, and then through the process of getting our plan approved by Judge Boyle. So kudos to him, and I encourage you all to come up and take a look at the brand new courtroom that we have in Courtroom 1. And I take any questions you might have.
Quick, just for the, so people understand, Your Honor, the civil matters.
Oh, civil matters, what, the rule, I should say that in terms of priority, what Judge Needham is looking at in terms of his priority for trials, trials aren't, and jury trials aren't distinguished between type, they're just put on the list. And then they're ordered based upon a priority that's in the plan that we sent to Judge Boyle. Civil trials are dead last. So after everything else is done, civil trial, jury trials. So that's just the priority that was placed and was approved. But it's because we have constitutional and statutory obligations that trump all of the civil trials priorities. So,
Thank you,
I
Judge.
have a couple of questions.
Go ahead.
So for in the hallways and the conference rooms, can there be like cleaning supplies for attorneys and their clients to be meeting? My understanding is that like defense attorneys or clients' attorneys are meeting with their clients and maybe multiple clients within that same enclosed space, and though there may be somebody coming out periodically cleaning things, there's certainly not the availability to clean in between clients, and they're still in that enclosed space with them. So possibly leaving some cleaning supplies in each room. And then I also would just like to know what the jury deliberation room setup is. That going to be where everybody can be in the same room and still distance? So just those couple of questions.
okay, so with regard to the cleaning supplies in the conference rooms, that's a great idea, and I think that can be passed on to Pat, who can pass it on to facilities and include it. We have on the tables in the courtrooms hand sanitizer and wipes, along with a lovely sign that was created to please clean the table. So we could certainly duplicate that effort in each of the conference rooms, and it's probably a great idea. So I'm sure Pat will carry that message back to Jim. With regard to jury deliberations, our plan calls for the deliberations when they have to be together for deliberations at the close of the trial, that will take place in the courtroom. So they will be deliberating in the courtroom because it's the only space that we have where they can all be together and socially distance. During their breaks, what we're going to do, because we only have one jury trial happening at a time, is that we will divide them for their breaks between the existing jury deliberation rooms now. So we will either use 2 or 3, perhaps 3, depending on, we haven't actually gotten that far, but we have 4 rooms available to divide jurors out to maintain social distance, so when they're having their break. It also will help because each of these jury rooms has 2 bathrooms, so it will minimize the number of people that would be using the same bathroom, though it will obviously maximize the number of bathrooms to be cleaned. So that's a two-edged sword there, I suppose, in terms of issues. But so that's our plan. So we'll maintain the social distance by having them deliberate in the courtroom. And then if the lawyers and the judge need to talk, for some reason, a jury question comes up or something, that'll have to be conducted on the record in chambers or in another courtroom.
Thank you.
Supervisor Thompson, any question?
Yes,
I'm sorry,
thank you, Judge.
Administrator Thompson,
Yep.
I apologize.
I get it. Do you think one courtroom for jury trials is going to be enough to get us through the backlog and ongoing pandemic? I mean, is one going to do it?
Well, I looked at, we were all stacking jury trials into July, and interestingly enough, it's largely resolved down to one trial a day or less. So in other words, branch one is not completely used. I've looked at, we've got the calendar now for August, and it doesn't look too bad. So I'm cautiously optimistic. If you take the number of jury trials that we actually have around here pre-COVID and you put them all in branch one, it's probably doable. And I will say, I think just our efforts at creating a 14-day deadline for resolution have focused the minds of many attorneys in terms of resolution. And I had, for example, this first week of July, I had 6 jury trials scheduled. They were going to, you know, in order of precedence, obviously we wouldn't do them all. I think we planned to do 3. They all resolved. So I don't know if it's a good sign, but we'll see. And maybe Mr. Nieskus has thoughts on that. He's been around here a lot longer than I.
I think over the last few years, we've averaged around 25 trials a year. Most of them are a day, day and a half. There have been longer ones. So one, yes. Second is what you're finding is July got stacked up because we didn't have any in March, April, May. Courts were putting them in July with the anticipation. So it's a little bit busier. We started out with 22. I think we're down to about 6 at this point. The other thing is defense attorneys and their clients don't want to do jury trials in the current environment. They're concerned about the jury panels who may or may not want to be here. They're also concerned about doing it with their client and themselves masked, because until, as the court said, the jurors are going to be wearing masks, the prosecutors, their client. In some circumstances, they don't believe that puts their client in a best light to sit before a jury. So people are resolving or people are moving their cases. So I think one courtroom is going to be adequate.
And I will say about that, when in terms of the changes that we've made to the courtroom, we looked at making them temporary versus permanent. Ultimately, the judges in consultation with the county decided just make it permanent. So it looks just like the old courtroom in terms of the wood, and they did a great job of engineering how to build a new wall, et cetera. As I said, you should come up and take a look. But it's going to just stay with us for the foreseeable future. And one thing I should add, and I know you talked about the KIP projects, is the next evolution coming to the courts is we're going to be continuing our efforts to get the new technology installed that was authorized by the county board in this year's KIP budget. And there's $300,000 toward that effort. And we're basically going to do it on a courtroom, we're going to do courtroom 1 first to get that done right, and then let the judges experience where we put new TVs and how the new technology works with a control box for the judge, et cetera. And I think it's going to be particularly helpful because as judges come and go through jury trials, when that technology would probably be most useful, they'll be able to experience it. We'll probably do courtroom 1, and what we're anticipating is we're going to have 2 TVs for the gallery, so there'll be gallery TVs facing backwards. There'll be 2 TVs in the ceilings facing the jury in this massive new jury box. There'll be a small TV at each of the attorney tables, 1 at the witness stand, and 1 for the judge. So that's a lot of extra TVs, but luckily TVs are not enormously expensive these days. There's a lot of technology we have to do to get these feeds through the existing Crestron system. But when we're done, then we'll use courtroom 1 as sort of our test bed to see that this worked before we go spend all the money, hang all the TVs, and say that didn't work. So it's kind of a good opportunity to put all the judges in my courtroom once we get that done as well.
Thank you, Judge, and thank you for the invitation to come up to the courtroom to see it. I would certainly like to take advantage of it, and I'll chat with the other committee members to see if they want to either go individually or as a group. If we go as a group, I imagine we have open meeting considerations that we'll have to jump over. But thank you very much for all the efforts you and Judge Needham and the other judges have done in the last few months. I know it's been very hectic and very trying, and it's turned out very well. Before I turn to Mr. O'Keefe for a quick report on the CJCC and its committees, I'll note that Supervisor Hanson had asked in a previous meeting that we take a look at the Stepping Up program, which deals with mental health delivery. We have looked at it, and Supervisor Hanson has worked with Mr. O'Keefe and myself and others, and it will be on the agenda of the CJCC on Thursday of July 9th, I'm sorry, Thursday of next week. And then it will be referred to the Mental Health Committee. And I know our new director of HHS is very keen on this topic and very interested in working on it. And we expect to report back from those entities reasonably quickly, probably by September. And we would look forward to taking that up at this committee at that time. Mr. O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Every month as part of your packet, I will have a summary of each subcommittee's progress, when they met, what they're working on, and any action we took. So if you have questions, I won't go over every subcommittee today, but please let me know. Our next CJCC meeting is, like the chair said, next Thursday, July 9th at 8 a.m., and it will be using the Zoom platform, so that'll be our first meeting using that Zoom platform. The meeting will be video. That's going to be a change. The executive committee met and decided to video our meetings, make us more accessible to the community and to the public as a whole. So, if any county board members would like a Zoom invitation, please let me know. If you'd like to just come into the meeting, that would be fine. Just let me know, and maybe maybe I'll just start doing that in the future. This is kind of a process for us. COVID-19 kind of stopped us in our tracks with a lot of things, but it also gave us some opportunities to move some things forward that we were thinking about. One example, I can maybe let the judge talk about it just briefly, about texting for court appearances. We had a lot of people missing court appearances. Warrants were issued, and next thing you know, they're on their way to jail and waiting to see a judge. Could be over a weekend, possibly. So maybe you could just talk about the texting and how that's worked.
Well, we basically have the technology through our state CCAP system to, if you've designated a particular cell phone number for a defendant or any listed party, you can text them information about the next hearing. And so we're slowly adding that in. We need to get permission from each defendant to do that because there can be some text costs associated with some plans. So we've been doing it on the record. It's been a little difficult to add them in because we haven't had them in person. So you don't have the little form there. But I will say I'm looking forward to being a great help in other counties, Dane County, Barron County. I mean, the little text message form is right there on the defense table, and they fill it out right at the beginning at initial appearances, and I think it's helpful. So it's another way to use technology to reduce the number of people that have to come into jail for failing to appear.
Are there any questions on the CJCC? If there are none, I'll turn to our medical examiner, Patty Schachter.
Good morning. I have a handout for you and just the data from the medical examiner's office, but one of the things I wanted to bring to your attention as we're collecting data, we found that, and I've talked to public health about this, is that we need to start a focus on men's health. So far this year, 100% of our suicides have been men, 100% of our accidental deaths have been men, and 66% of our natural unexpected deaths have been men. So, and the age break is from 40 to 55. So we've got a So we've got conversations to have, and from a public health perspective, this is actually something we've never really talked about before. And there's a lot of comorbidities that we're seeing ahead of time. And with our natural deaths, the biggest diagnostic is pulmonary embolism, which is preventable. And, you know, pretty much everything we're seeing, there is prevention that's available. So educating people in St. Croix County about men's health is going to be a topic that we're going to be working on. And I hope that you guys will help us promote the men's health movement, because really, in our unexpected, all of the men had health insurance. They just didn't go to the doctor. So that is a huge thing. So when you have a benefit that you don't use, and you know this is the outcome, it's very negative. And of our unexpected natural deaths, most of them had children, which then increases the ACEs score, which when we talk about ACEs and mental health and of children, that's a huge indicator, a loss of a parent. So we're starting to kind of connect some things here. We're going to dig into it a little more to see where we can go with this here information. But this was, when we've seen our accidents and our suicides not as prevalent because of the safer at home, this whole natural death thing really shined a light on us. And we contacted public health, and hopefully we can work together to figure out some sort of public education program on men's health. So other than that, with COVID, our cremation rate has increased to 74%. And that there also is problematic, as I've been talking to funeral homes and stuff. The grief impact of not having traditional funerals, memorials, and whatnot is also something that we see is probably going to have an impact in mental health as we move forward, because there isn't that natural grieving process that's happening. So these are things that we're seeing, and just letting you know.
So they're not having funerals at all?
Well, there has been a trend of death being inconvenient for quite a while. So it's moved from, I don't want you to take days off of work, to let's just have funerals on weekends. And this has been a trend that's been going on for about 15 years, and we've seen that. And that not allowing people to grieve in a natural, organic way does have an impact on mental health. Now, with the limited amount of funerals, a lot of people just had their loved ones cremated, and then it's like, well, we'll go back to it. Well, now it's summer, life goes on, it becomes inconvenient, and you never have that celebration of life or religious thing. And then the people that do have grief don't have the capacity to move on, because it's just kind of been overlooked. So grieving and mental health is something that is, you know, definitely involved here. And also when we looked at our natural unexpected deaths, a lot of these folks had recent unexpected deaths, like in the last 5 years, of someone close to them. So grieving, mental health, addiction, it all comes through, and it really does shine through in the health, the overall health and well-being of the men in St. Croix County. So we have to figure out a strategic way to, even if we started at the county level, of really promoting men's health so that people are more willing to talk about it. So that's the job of the medical examiner, is to bring the trends and let you know what's happening, and this is what we're seeing now. Any questions?
I had one question. Supervisor Bernie has one question. And this follows up on what Mr. Witt commented on in the KIP report. I think the big item for the medical examiner in the KIP is the LODOX. Mm-hmm. And you've given us several very thoughtful briefings, comprehensive briefings in the past, but this is a new committee. And perhaps you could just quickly review the short version of what the benefits of a LODOX are. And then I know Mr. Witt had mentioned we wouldn't be proceeding unless we got the grant, which would cover half the cost roughly. And I know in the past the conversation has also been, to a degree, if we received it, if we thought, and it's of course, the KIP, the LODOX and the KIP has been approved previously by previous boards, so there's been substantial receptivity to it, although some oppose it. Anyway, could you comment briefly on the LODOX?
So LODOX is a digital autopsy, so it's an MRI, basically, for decedents. When you look at the autopsies that we do in St. Croix County, only about 15% we have no idea what happened. You know, the person is deceased, we don't know why it happened, we don't know how it happened, and we bring them in for a internal exam, and most of the people we autopsy are natural deaths, but we just, you know, have to rule out that there's nothing going on inside. So a LODOX would then take everybody and we would scan them through there, and then if we saw unexpected things, then we wouldn't have to do a full autopsy. You would then just do your full autopsies for homicides and, you know, like that. The piece that's important here is the people that are dying in the hospital. We are doing autopsies also for people who die in the hospital to save civil litigation. So it's our responsibility to do that because we have to prove what's going on. We have to have. So if someone is admitted to the hospital and they die within 24 hours of being admitted, that is an automatic medical examiner's case. If someone dies on an operating table, that is an automatic medical examiner's case. And as you know, with death, it becomes very emotional and fingers are pointed. And, you know, a doctor can say it's probable that they had a heart attack. And then as you see, 74% of our people are cremated, and then they get cremated, and 3 weeks later they call the sheriff's office and say, there's elderly abuse, there's this, there's that. We have no way to prove one way or the other. It becomes a huge issue. And every time we do an autopsy itself, and it has to be ordered by the medical examiner's office, it's $1,400 to just have the process. Labs can run between, and now with complexity of drugs, can run anywhere from $150 to $2,000, depending on what we test for. And with all the psychedelics out there, if we're looking for a specific drug, it can be very, very expensive. And then we also pay another $500 just to have Dr. Mills certify that this is true and that there helps with witnesses and everything when it goes into the justice system. The medical examiner's office has nothing to do with justice. We are there for the decedent. And, you know, so all of this collectively makes a big difference. So with that LODOX, we would be able to run someone in a body bag. We would have them completely secure. They would be in a body bag. It would be secured. We could run them through, and then we would send that off to a radiologist, and it could be with Health Partners. It could be anywhere like that. They could look through and see there's nothing there. This is, you know, yes, there was an occlusion in the heart. Yes, there was pulmonary embolism. There's a basic MRI, very good slides, and we would be good. The other problem that we are facing all over is that only 50 certified forensic pathologists graduate from college every year, and 25 of them go out of country. So the demand for forensic pathology is only going to be increasing, as will the cost. And there's going to be a time, you know, when we utilize Ramsey County, but Ramsey County also serves about 60 other counties and their capacity. So this is also a capacity issue. So we have the opportunity here in St. Croix County, if we take the DD building and we actually, you know, be strategic, start with the LODOX, we have a lab. We could do, we could turn the DD building into a regional center that does autopsies, that does LODOX, and we actually could partner then with some of the other counties and become a regional area. So the building has capacity, and we've already, you know, talked with them about doing autopsies here and how that would look and how it would work, and there is room for that. which then, if you're, I'm always big picture, looking down the road, this could be a huge opportunity for St. Croix County to become really a real forensic leader in the area. So that's my overall dream, but the LODOX is the start.
Thank you very much. Supervisor Burning.
That was a lot of really good stuff. Well, my first question that popped out of this is ACEs score.
Adverse childhood experiences. So everyone should go
Okay.
to look it up and just do it. It's something that it's 10 questions, and it just kind of tells you, it's data driven and tells you how, based on experiences in your childhood, how predictable it is that you could have mental health struggle with addiction and comorbidities. And I think you guys have been using ACEs for a long time. It's very dependable information.
Yeah, that's good. Let's not, after I take Fortnite away from my kids, let's not run that test through them. But that's good to know, because I figured it was something along those lines. I just wasn't sure what the acronym stood for. So that's awesome. You answered the question on the LODOX, and then that led to another question, which is how much discussion has been made with surrounding counties if St. Croix County chooses to make this investment? What are the chances of us becoming a partner with them?
I've talked to all of them, Pierce County, Polk County, Dunn County, Barron County. All of us as medical examiners and coroners are very interested in a way to meet capacity that's closer. Because everyone's going in different directions, and this here would be a way that they too could turn around. Some counties are doing autopsies on everybody, no matter what it is. If we did, just because people watch way too much TV and think that real life and Dr. G are the same, that's what their expectations are. So when you say, if someone has a event, they expect a autopsy because they don't understand what cause and manner is. What we're looking for is cause and manner. And, so everybody knows that something closer would be good, and it would help their budgets. I've also talked to a couple of the county board members that I know in some of the other counties, and they know that it would be a huge impact on their public safety budget.
So when you say a huge impact, it would actually help them also revenue-wise, like not have to expend so much?
Yeah.
And then when we're talking about partnering with these other counties, are we talking about a per incident compensation to St. Croix County? Are we talking about a contract where we are available? Should we get into this now? I maybe not, I guess, but.
The start would be to work with the hospitals.
Okay.
That would be the first step in that under 24-hour death. That's where you would start, and then slowly work out from there. And it obviously would be a learning type thing to see how we could grow, but it definitely, thinking into the future, would be beneficial to St. Croix County.
Patty, didn't you put together a pretty detailed report, a year or so
while
ago?
ago, yeah.
Why don't you dust that off and send it to the committee members?
Okay.
So they can review it, and if you have a chance, maybe update certain
Yep.
parts of it.
Yep.
I think it would be beneficial.
And the technology has changed. What was a LODOX, now other companies have come in and it has changed a lot, even as far as the specs for the building. So it's becoming more affordable because everyone knows this is the wave of the future, because there's just not going to be the capacity to do full autopsies.
Are there any other questions for a medical examiner? Thank you very much again, and turn to the sheriff for update on the Day Report Center and then a policy update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Day Report Center. We are doing business now on a limited capacity back in Hudson. We had been up in Richmond for a bit, and now we've moved back. That's the trailer out front of the sheriff's office. A lot more room in there, as well as some future expansion on the current day report area. So our numbers of current supervision level for June, we're at 300 on bail bond, 23 Huber. Treatment court has 17, diversion has 23, family court has 7. So that's the caseload that the team downstairs is working with now. So our June statistics, the average drug test per day, we're up to 13. Now back in January, we were at 39. But last month, in May, we were at 6. June's going to kick off a bit more. One thing we have noted with getting back into testing and trying to get back into some routine for those being tested, the bail jump referrals for June, 2 were for THC, 10 were for some other drugs, 12 were for PBT failures, 9 missed tests, they didn't come into test, and 3 that did not have any contact with the DRC. So for the month of June, we had 36 that were referred to the district attorney's office for review. Now we go back to how many we're testing. 13. We have 36 referred up. In January, we referred up 33. So even with the reduced amount that we're testing, we're getting more failures because they had months of really no accountability. We're trying to get people back into the swing of that accountability. So we've had a spike in June that we're working through. I believe we'll get back to where we were with that 91% compliance rate. This month, though, again, getting people back into it, and there's still a lot of anxiety and stress. People are out of jobs. That leads to some struggles at home. So those are some of the numbers that we have. Yep, referrals 36 and 32 for the year. And our average daily population for the jail for the month of June was the month of June was 74. Again, referring back to an average last year of 126 and a high of last year of 151. We're at 74 now, with a lot out on electronic home monitoring or GPS bracelets, which is added to that tracking component, monitoring component that the Huber officer and the day report center do. Any questions on the day report center?
Sheriff, do you see an ongoing use of the electronic monitoring in lieu of jail going forward? Do you see that as a kind of a new trend?
For Huber, I do. I think the key component is the monitoring. I know other counties put them out on bracelets. I don't know how much they monitor. You know, my concern is always public safety. And as we look at the sheriff's duty for housing, where does that housing take place? It could take place in the building. It could take place at their house. But so even if they're out on EHM, I need to make sure that they're not committing new crimes, domestic abuse taking place in the home that we may not know about. So it does take a component of officers' time to really monitor when they're out. Again, right now what we're doing is those that are sentenced, even sentenced, that may not have Huber, what we're doing is 25% of their first portion of their sentence, we're trying to have them inside. And then we can see if they're compliant with rules. Even Huber, 25% we're trying at the beginning. If they're compliant, following the rules, negative tests, and even those serving sentences, we still have them come in and test. Again, that monitoring. So after the 25% inside, then we're letting them go out so they can kind of earn that out. So we're trying that right now during the COVID times. If it's successful and we see a benefit not only to their job stability, maybe home life stability, they're following some of the guidelines, AA, whatever they might have. If that's beneficial, we may continue that.
Supervisor Bernie.
I'm just curious, of all the fails recently in June, how many of those do you attribute or are not attributed to, but how many of those do you know have lost their job during that time and it's put them in a spiral? Do you have any of that data at all? And is it possible to get that?
I do not have that data, and I don't know if that data is compiled for those on bond. I don't believe it is. I don't know if we'd know that.
Supervisor, I wouldn't even have anecdotal evidence, about that, and that as unreliable as possible. Certainly, we hear people, but we're also dealing with a population that had a fairly high unemployment rate to begin with. As the sheriff indicated, I think the real problem is mid-March, testing stopped. We began some in April, very minimal, and in May, a lot more. But we saw the same kind of thing happen in our treatment court individuals. We do this because it's a public safety concern. It helps people gain a leg up on sobriety. But they need, particularly in this point in their issues, they need to, quite frankly, be monitored. You drop the monitoring piece, they go back into the old ways. So we have none of that information. I couldn't even give you anecdotes.
Yeah, and the only reason I ask is because there was you said something along those lines of, oh, we got people unemployed. I didn't know if there was a correlation, if there was something. So if it's not applicable, then that's just fine with me. That answers my question. Thank you.
And I have to be excused. They dropped a 9 o'clock on my calendar.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Sheriff, for the report on the DRC, and then we can turn to the policy update. I know there have been so many things occurring in the last 30 days, all the way from natural disasters in the last week to unrest in the weeks before that. And could you just share with us some of the key policy positions of your office on various important items such as use of force and that sort of thing, just to give us an update on how we got there and what we're doing?
And this conversation could get quite in-depth, or it could scratch the surface. I'm going to cover a couple things here, and it's really a lot of the questions that I've been answering from the public as well. What do we have in place to prevent, to ensure, to assist, to train? What resources? That's something that happened in Minneapolis, doesn't happen elsewhere. We utilize, several years ago, we went to a company called Lexipol. Lexipol is a group of individuals throughout the country. I believe there's 300 of them that their only job is to research case law, best practices for law enforcement, new state and federal laws that may impact day-to-day operations of agencies. And they roll out those updates. Prior to about 5-6 years ago, we didn't have that, and it relied solely upon officers or chiefs or sheriffs to try to keep up on that, which was a daunting task, if not almost impossible, if you didn't have somebody just assigned to policies and the changing of the laws. So Lexipol has been very beneficial for us. A lot of loading on the front end, we could tailor it to our agency, and they put out then Lexipol on a monthly basis best practices. Obviously, best practices are starting to be looked at, reviewed in light of the last month. There's even been emails coming out of, we're looking at different things. So we utilize that company. I think I added the use of force policy that we have. And I think it's important to understand, or to at least review, what force is, because there's different kinds of force. In the definition section of our lexipol policy, force is the application of physical techniques or tactics, chemical agents, or weapons on another person. It is not a use of force when a person allows him or herself to be searched, escorted, handcuffed, or restrained. That's force. Obviously, deadly force is a force reasonably anticipated and intended to create a substantial likelihood of causing death or very serious injury. So we got to break those up into, when people ask, well, what's your policy on use of force? It could vary differently based on the situation. Also, in the media right now and in the public, the 8 can't wait. And they are 8 critical topics that are discussed, again, in the public right now. And so what was put together by the actual Wisconsin Chiefs of Police, and it kind of lays out how Wisconsin trains. And I can't say how Minnesota trained or how Minneapolis trains. I don't know any of their state laws. I don't know any of their recruit school training, ongoing training. I can't speak for any other state. I know what Wisconsin does. I can't speak for any other agency. I can't speak to what Hudson does. I can't speak to what Glenwood does. Wisconsin State Patrol is a state agency, or a federal agency, the U.S. Marshals that work in the state. I can't speak to any of that. I can only speak to what we do here in St. Croix County. The 8 can't wait. It is ban chokeholds and strangleholds, require de-escalation, require warning before shooting, requires exhausting all alternatives before shooting, duty to intervene, ban shooting at moving vehicles, require use of force continuum, and requires comprehensive reporting. So I'll start first with the ban strangleholds and chokeholds. That is not permitted or trained as a compliance hold in Wisconsin. That's not something we even start out with in our training, in our profession when we first start. There are some agencies that have, and it was just on the news the other day, carotid neck restraints. So in essence, like the MMA sleeper holds. That is not deemed a chokehold because a chokehold would cut off air and possibly constrict the windpipe. But we don't do either of those. And the MMA style carotid neck restraint, if it is a use of force that you are losing, and I think back to 2012 when we had that in the jail, an MMA sleeper was used to save another deputy's life who was being choked out. The other deputies that were there could not get this inmate off of the jail deputy, and one of the other deputies came down to the pod area, is trained in some MMA ground combat, and that was used. But also very important to everything that we use, and I'm watching it on TV now as well, it's the immediate aftercare of those that we deal with. And sometimes it seems that those on the scene are not getting that job done. If you use of force, you then have to put on another hat right after that. And that has to be, okay, well now how may I help you? What are your injuries? Can I get an ambulance here? Are you bleeding? What can I do? There has to be that ability, and maybe it's not by the guy or the person who was involved in that use of force, but the other responding officers have to step in and say, all right, now we need to control this and help this person. Because that's really law enforcement's job, is preservation of life. It has always been. It should be the goal. So we'll discuss that. That's not one of the 8, but it's one that I'll discuss of, we really have to do that follow-up medical care if they need it. After someone's been tased, we call an ambulance. They remove the probes, they check the person out. Whether the person wants to be checked out or not, we call them, because now they're in our custody. So the last thing I want is to get somebody to the jail and their heart on something that could have been maybe handled by EMS. Now that's impacted. So we utilize EMS after tasers, after OC spray. They'll either get checked out, or once we get to the jail, they'll get washed out. So there has to be that care. And I think that, in some instances, is where things need to be improved on in some areas. I think we do a pretty good job of it here. These guys are, our use of forces are very low. And that goes into the second one, requires de-escalation. That's trained in the Wisconsin Defense and Arrest Tactics Intervention Options currently. So de-escalation, we do that every day. Every contact we have with somebody really is a de-escalation. We don't want to escalate as soon as we start talking to somebody. There has to be some form, and we have tens of thousands of contacts with the public yearly. Day Report Center has 12,000 people face-to-face contacts. Every time they come in, there's a conversation. It has to be a good conversation. It has to be, I can think of maybe 2 or 3 where the person tried to flee and the use of force to stop that person. I think one officer was assaulted several years ago, but again, we de-escalate each time, and that has to be the goal. We need to de-escalate. Part of the things that law enforcement has had to adapt to is something that over the last 2 years, and we continue to do, is crisis intervention training. That is a form of de-escalation. Each officer gets about 40 hours once they get to that class. Obviously, COVID has shut down a lot of training. So we have some new guys that have not gotten to this crisis intervention training, but it's dealing with those that, as the name says, are in crisis. And that crisis could be a mental health crisis, a substance abuse crisis. It could be a crisis in the home, domestic. How do we now talk to somebody and bring them at least back down that we can communicate? And there's also, as we get in there, the duty to intervene. That's a little farther down. But when we talk about de-escalation, part of that CIT training, and also what these guys, I think, do a really good job of, is if they can see somebody's not connecting with who they're talking to, what they'll tag in. Hey, let me give it a try. Because it could be they just don't like that person. They've been arrested by that person. They may not like that gender. They may not like that size. Something may not click with who we're dealing with, but somebody on scene might be able to click. So they'll change up, and it has been successful. But again, that's trained. There's verbal de-escalation. There's physical de-escalation. When we go hands-on, and use of force is never pretty. There's no way to tidy up a use of force, because that's what it is. It is force. But one thing that we train, and one thing that the state trains, is force has to be commensurate with the force you're getting. It cannot be excessive. Somebody called and said, do you have to notify the person before you use excessive force on them? Well, the question in and of itself makes no sense. But I always go back to excessive force is never acceptable, because it is force that is excessive to what is needed. You use the force that's needed to control the subject. Now that could be based on this. There are so many officer factors in that as well. When we use our use of force continuum, there's 5 categories we go through. The first one is our mere presence. When we walk in a room, that may control a room, just our mere presence. If that doesn't work, our dialogue, when we go into de-escalation, we go into, hey, you guys need to split up, you need to go this way, you need to go that way. If that doesn't work, then we can go to empty hand control. What that is blanketing an arm, maybe directing somebody to the ground, maybe against a wall to separate. If that isn't acceptable or successful, then we go to what's on our belt. And that could be a taser, that could be a baton, that could be a chemical agent of OC. Those are intermediate, what they call intermediate weapons. And again, those are used very sparingly. Someone asked me about our batons. I remember one baton being used on a fleeing subject that they threw and they hit the legs and the person tripped. And that's the last baton I can remember being used in effectuating an arrest in 15 years. That's something that is hardly ever used. Pepper spray, maybe a handful of times a year on the road, and the same with the taser. Rarely do we even get to intermediate weapons. And then lastly, obviously, is deadly force. And deadly force could be with a firearm, and more than likely, that is what is always thought of as deadly force. But we've seen other items used for deadly force. It could be a vehicle. It could be, in the old days, the flashlights were metal. So deadly force can be a whole host of items or delivery systems. Again, we had an officer-involved shooting resulting in a death in 2012. Knock on wood, that has been our last one. Prior to that, there was one in the mid-2000s. And that might be the ones that come to my mind in the last 20 years. It's too many, but it got to that point that, and again, Administrator Thompson, I believe that was probably one of your first years here, the 2012 one for the night vision, when the gentleman came down and fired at the squad cars. Sometimes we are dealt a pretty bad hand, and that's how we have to respond to it. Sometimes we don't, many times we don't get to deal the cards at all. So our de-escalation and our use of force continuum, but that's also, I've also been asked, well, do you have to expend the use of force continuum before you get to deadly force? Well, the dynamics of a situation may never allow us to do that. If we have an active shooter, we are not going to start with presence and then empty hand control and then some pepper spray. We will not work through that. The force presented many times will start us down that path of what force do we need to stop that threat.
Sheriff, could I interrupt for just 1 second?
Yes.
You've given a very thoughtful and comprehensive description, and I know you've got a couple more points to make, so I don't want to cut you off. But I just want to ask if any of the committee members have any questions at this time for the sheriff, and then we'll ask the sheriff to continue to the conclusion of his presentation. Are there any questions from the committee?
Do we have records of the instances and the deputies who are using that use of force? Understand like a baton hasn't been used, but possibly like a taser or the pepper spray. Are those being counted or noted somewhere?
We do note them. We do document every time use of force is used. That is documented. Do I have a running tally? That is why we're upgrading our RMS system. There is no checkbox to check in this system use of force. Hand checking the records, we could. But we don't have that readily printable, and that was one of the reasons we went to upgrading the system that we currently have, which we started in 1999, running crystal reports of incidences is extremely difficult. And again, there was no category for use of force. But each use of force is documented, reviewed. In certain cases, such as if a firearm is used, if a vehicle is used, we will convene a use of force panel. We convened one last summer to review the vehicle pursuit in Deer Park. And on that panel, we brought in disciplines. When I speak of disciplines, I speak of trainers from a host of different other agencies to review how we handled that and the actions of the officers both during and after. We utilized use of force trainers and several sheriffs from surrounding counties, surrounding agencies, to get a good look at were our policies handled, were our policies followed, if not, why, and was it appropriate for the officer's actions. I know that's a roundabout way of saying I don't have that number in front of me, but they are reviewed and they are accessible, though that would take some time. Again, with our, knock on wood, minimal use of force incidences, there is no deputy that sticks out to me that I have a concern about on their application of their use of forces.
Kind of a follow-up question to that, Sheriff. Some of the criticism, founded or unfounded, that we hear is that these panels or that you described are police officers investigating police officers. And so I was happy to hear that you said you bring in outside consultants, trainers, to look at the use of force if we have an incident, so that you have maybe, in addition to the professional law enforcement people on these panels, in addition you have someone maybe outside of the profession that may be able to lend some sort of maybe outside perspective. Am I kind of making my point? Because I think that's part of the big dialogue, is that, we're not really doing and I'm not saying we are, but that generally speaking, law enforcement agencies are kind of investigating themselves.
Right. And then even after those panels are done, because if it gets to the level of a panel, it was a use of force that may have created serious injury or death. And then at the conclusion of that, the district attorney gets it. They review, they look at it to see if it was appropriate use of force, if it crossed the line in any area. So then we send it for them to review as well.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Sorry. Supervisor Hanson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sheriff Knudsen, is at this time, because of the things that have been going on in the country, I'm concerned that we implement or begin to introduce a more publicly transparent aspect to the process if we do have a use of force incident. Not because I have any doubt in my mind that you run an excellent program with your officers, but because there will always be questions now. And it would be nice to get ahead of those questions and to be accountable to the public. How do you feel about that idea, and do you see an avenue to accomplish that?
I'm not sure what that avenue would look like. One of my concerns is always the understanding of the dynamics of a situation if one has never been involved in one. If somebody on that panel has never been faced with a gun pointing at them, or someone coming at them with a knife, or a high-speed chase, or officer factors of a smaller officer having to use factors or having to use intermediate weapons on a larger subject who is merely using their fists but winning the fight. I think there is obviously some areas that it is good to have some outside input, but to have somebody fully understand not only the training, but also the real life. Again, this isn't Gunsmoke. This is not a movie. Lives matter on both sides, public and law enforcement. And I don't ever want to water down the quick decisions we have to make because somebody has been able to sit at a table, review video, review paperwork, review case law, and make their decision after weeks and months when officers have seconds to make that decision. We always hope it's the right decision. We always hope they rely back on training, and we hope any errors are errors of the mind, not of the heart. So I am open for that discussion, but I do have some reservations, and I hope you can understand some of my concern with that. I do want to be as transparent as possible. Anybody that knows me has always, I hope, gotten that impression that I want to be as forthcoming. I want to, when people ask, I will show them. But that's, in my opinion, the public input is where juries come in.
Senator Sackner.
As the medical examiner, when we go to scenes, and especially with the county, we don't have weapons. We are at total, we are at the disposal of everything that's going on there, whether it's a suicide, whether it's a homicide, whether it's an unexpected death. Myself and my team have never, ever felt anything but safe. We have never experienced anything but kindness and empathy and sympathy to help families process through probably the most difficult of situations, and that's when there's death. And unfortunately, if Sheriff Knutz and I went to the people that we serve and asked for a good review, it would be inappropriate. And the thing of it is, we all do good work, and the Sheriff's Department does good work, but people hear the people who have a bad experience more than we hear the people who have a good experience. And based on all the scenes that we've been through in all the years that I've been doing this work, I have nothing but 100% respect for the Sheriff's Department.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that comment. Are there any other questions at this time for the sheriff? Sheriff, again, I don't want to cut you off, and I know this is a very important topic, and we want to get out the key points that you would like to raise with us. I mean, we can share them with the board, and our listening audience would very much appreciate hearing what you have to say. I don't mean to keep you from other duties for too long this morning, so I would just defer to you as to what you'd like to say now. But if you have other things you'd also like to add at our next meeting to augment what we're saying, we very much would make room for that as well. So, Sheriff, I'll turn it over to you again.
And I told you I could get deep into the weeds on this. I will move through these a little more quick, but I do want to get to all these 8 can't wait, because we do address the majority, if not all of them. They require warning before shooting. Again, we do firearms training bi-monthly. Officers cannot miss 2 consecutive trainings by policy. So, and one of those trainings is a scenario-based training multiple scenarios with multiple trainers for the 1 or 2 officers. So they'll go into quarter building, they'll go into an active shooter, they'll go into a suspicious person, they'll go into an unlocked door, clear the building. And what do they encounter? And these scenarios do not all end. The trainers have it that if you handle things appropriately, you may potentially never have to use a weapon. So these aren't all absolute, everything ends in a shooting. The officer gets to work his way through and get the best outcome. Sometimes it ends in a taser because the guy comes at you with a crowbar. Sometimes it's an ambush. But a lot of times we like to set the trainings up where de-escalation is a key component. Requiring warning before shooting, though, and when we talk about training during firearms, well, ideally we'd like to say drop the gun. But again, if there's an active shooter, we've seen enough school shooting situations that sometimes that's just not possible. And we need to stop that threat as soon as possible. And so I think it's the always term in law enforcement. That's difficult to tag onto any action. Requires exhausting all alternatives before shooting. Again, trained in Wisconsin, defense and arrest tactics, deadly force is the last resort. I kind of went through our use of force continuum, and sometimes if we have to jump to that, it means there's an active threat going on and somebody's life is in danger. Duty to intervene. This is a big one. That is under our policy 300.2.1, the duty to intercede. Any deputy present or observing another deputy using force that is clearly beyond that which is objectively reasonable under the circumstances shall, when in a position to do so, intercede to prevent the use of unreasonable force. A deputy who observes another employee use force that exceeds the degree of force permitted by law should promptly report these observations to a supervisor, unless if they are able to intervene, but then they need to tell us. So it is in our policy. It's also trained during in-service specialized trainings as well. Again, Wisconsin has always done that. Well, as long as I can remember. I shouldn't say always. As long as I can remember, my training has always been, if you see something going awry, step in. So, again, I can't speak to what any other agency trains or how they do things, or their hierarchy. And I believe it's a culture. I believe it's a culture in every law enforcement agency. I believe that truly drives much of what happens in our policies. Ban shooting at moving vehicles. The practice is highly discouraged. However, I will throw out a scenario of somebody shooting from a vehicle as they drive by. We have large groups out there at tubing places, at concerts, heaven forbid a school. If somebody's driving by shooting, banning shooting from moving vehicles, it's not realistic. There's no other way to stop that. Again, presence, verbal, OC, taser, all ineffective. And to stand by and watch that continue is negligent at best. Required use of force continuum. I went through that. We discussed, we always, again, start at the bottom, work our way up. And requires comprehensive reporting. So the use of force reporting reviews are already a practice in Wisconsin. Again, if somebody uses force, there's another form that they use that they need to fill out that prompts the supervisor reviewing that report to review that body cam, to review all other reports. If there's a taser that's used, the cartridge is taken as evidence, and we download the taser, that's got information on it as to how many cycles were used, what time it was used. It's got that information that also goes into the reports. So we review each use of force. Several different eyes look at that in a supervisory level. Again, if it rises to a point where we say we need to have other eyes look at it, I reach out to outside offices. So that is the 8 can't wait. Those are the 8 that seem to be the driving force of what people are looking at and looking for answers. And again, I can't stress enough, I don't know what Minneapolis does. I don't know what Madison does. I can't speak for any of them. I can truly only speak for how this office is run now, how it has been run in the past. And again, I believe it's a culture. So.
Are there any questions or observations from the committee members?
I think what the sheriff hit on when he says that it's the culture of the individual agency, I couldn't agree more, and I think that that addresses a lot of how these policies are implemented and enforced, and it all starts at the top and it works its way down through the culture. And so I couldn't agree more with what you said, Sheriff. The one question I had, we started using body cams, I don't know, 2 years ago now.
2018.
Yeah, speak just for a minute, how the use of body cams has either helped in your mind or added a whole nother level of complexity to law enforcement. And then I'll just tell you what just frustrates the heck out of me is when I hear news stories, not coming from St. Croix County, but that the officer that responded forgot to turn on his or her body cam. And is there, I know, speak to our policy as to how and when those body cams are activated. And then someone asked me once, is there a way to activate those cameras by supervision so that the officer, when he or she is responding in the heat of everything that's going on, they forget to do this when they're trying to take certain action? Is there a way that those body cams can be activated electronically or by the use of technology? So that's one less thing they have to worry about.
I'll start with the body cams. And as we talked in 2017, 2018, Ken Witt as well, this was something that the guys wanted. There was no resistance to, resistance was there for technology and learning new technology, but it wasn't for having body cams and being recorded. Actually, there was several that continually came up to us, when are we getting them, when are we getting them? In the mid-2000s, we had dash cams. The ones we had gone to were not durable, were not, and we got into that where, well, the system was down. We can only say we have dash cam, but the system didn't work that day, before people started looking, saying, oh, really? Is that really what's going on? So we went away from the dash cams, the kinds we used before. They are very costly. However, when we went to the body cams, the pros and the cons of the body cams are they do capture when you're dealing with somebody. They're usually affixed to the center of the chest. I've got mine in my pocket. So if I'm responding to a scene, it's not picking up that response. It's not picking up the road. It's not picking up, or if I want evidence of the drunk driver ahead of me, it's not picking that up. So that is one area that the body cams are not as helpful. I will say the body cams have been helpful to me on multiple occasions, and they have come from not my serious questioning of the deputy's actions, but from a citizen complaint. this deputy did this. And I watched the body cam and I said, I'm not sure what scene you were at, but that didn't happen. And it has really helped us in the area of citizen complaints. It has helped us weed through them and find out what really happened there. But again, I always caution with body cams, with any camera, with any video footage, it only records the scene. It doesn't record the dynamics. It doesn't record the tension. It doesn't record 95 degrees out. It doesn't record the hostility in a house on a domestic. It records sights and sounds, but not feelings. We've all talked about, every one of us has that sixth sense. Something's not right here. The camera doesn't pick that up. So the cameras are very important. And one of the things, one of the trainings I was at, it was a week-long training, and one of the things I truly took back was your eyes look, your mind is what sees. The scenario I'll use is if you're in the grocery store and you're looking for something on the shelf, and you look and you look and you look, and finally you see it and you're like, that was right in front of me. We've all done it. Well, it's right in front of you. It's in your camera. How could you not see it? I was looking, but my mind didn't see that. So when we look at somebody with a gun, or with a taser, or with an edged weapon, or coming at us with a cell phone, what do we see? I know what I'm looking at, but what am I seeing? And I think that's an important component of, well, it's on video, you should have known. Well, we're human. We can only go through so much in our mind as quickly as our brain will process it. I think that's an important part of having these body cams. They tell a great story, they tell a great picture, they document a lot, but they are not the end all. Because if I'm fighting several people, or I'm at the Apple River and there's a fight, my camera may show this fight, but I've got somebody here. I don't even see that. But that's not to say, well, it's on camera. So I always want to caution people when they say, well, here's the video. Okay, well, that's one component of this whole situation. I think that I want to stress as well. One of the challenges we're having is battery life. If we're out at a scene, this is a phone. It's a phone battery. Now you add the app to record. I can't run this 8 hours. The battery will go dead. Or we've had, just a couple weeks ago, these are all on chargers in offices, people typing. We had a chase in Hudson. Guys took off out of the office. We don't have our phones on us. So now we're looking at chargers in cars. Not ones we got to plug in and set, but a fixed ones that, because now you got the cradle, but what's going to hold it while driving? So Lieutenant Johnson is looking at that now, so we can charge them in squads. When we get done at a call, we can put it in, charge it up. So we hopefully don't, batteries run dead, or we leave them on charges when we run to a hot call. Can they be started away by somebody else? I don't believe so. Plus, they'd have to be logged into it. Now we can, if they have it activated, we can remotely view. We can scan in and see what they're seeing, or what they're looking at, or the situation if they're not answering their radio. If they're in the middle of a fight, we can remotely jump in, and we've done that a couple times. Where there's a guy with a gun and we're not getting a response back, we'll break in. It notifies the officer.
We have a question from
Thank you.
Supervisor Bernie.
So with everything that's gone on over the last 35, 40 days, and including the last 3 months, there's been a lot of stress not only on the public, but also on you as public servants. Looking at what's going on, I got several factors I'd like for you to, if you don't mind going into some of these for me, to make sure that we as a committee and us as a county are making sure that you're your office is taking care of, one, first and foremost, the mental health of and the morale of your crew, of your deputies and the office. How is that? I know you don't need to maybe get into it, but do you guys have enough access for your deputies to talk to someone about what they're feeling right now and what's going through their head, considering how much verbal abuse law enforcement has taken over the last 30 days? That's first one. I'll let you answer that, and then I'll go to my next ones.
Okay, yeah, let me answer that. Without a doubt, it has been a challenge. It has been stressful. The country is under a lot of stress, not just law enforcement, as you mentioned. The citizens, again, I think it's regionally, it's by culture, it's people's experiences with law enforcement. Some of the stuff that's being said throughout the country, obviously, every time you turn a TV on, you're seeing and hearing something. You can't escape it if you're anywhere near media. And some of the things I've watched, I agree with some of the citizens of those areas. What are they doing? What are the cops doing? I don't understand some of it either. Now, I don't get all the information that they get, but I also look and go, I don't understand it either. And I don't even say I'd like to believe, I know some of those things would not happen here. But again, human nature rolls into it. So it has been stressful. It's been stressful when the broad brush has been, the broad paintbrush of law enforcement in general. But we have to also be able to step back and say, all right, we get a lot of support from our region. I've had so many people call, or, they're sending food in, a cookie, whatever it is. I truly believe that there's a silent majority in this county that is supportive of us. And there's some voices in there that we hear. Mental health. That's something we've always discussed and tried to prepare for. And can we truly be 100% prepared? No, we never will. Because not only does life happen on the job, and then we go home. And then you go home to COVID, you go home to a whole host of things going on in society. But the county has real living. And Holly Hakes, she's our EAP, Employee Assistance Program. So what we did last fall is everybody was required to meet with her and discuss whatever. But what she did was she relayed some of the resources that the county has, some of the resources that she can provide, some of the resources that are out there. Again, nothing came back to me. And everybody went in thinking that it was what am I going to find out about them? Well, I don't find anything out about them. I want to know. So once she made that connection, she never gives me names, but she says, you know what? I got a call today from somebody in the office, and they just wanted to talk. She goes, what you guys are doing, the message you're sending is good. We've got connections now. It doesn't have to be anything here. I'm having trouble at home. They give her a call. I mean, so we're giving the resources that we believe that we're able to get for them. I'm always open to hear if there's more. But what the feedback I've been getting has been more than we've done in years past, I will say that.
Okay, excellent. So I guess that leads me to the next couple of, and these two are together, I guess they coincide, turnover and applications with what's going on in some communities around us, namely Minneapolis, and some in St. Paul, but namely Minneapolis, where we are seeing officers leaving. Are we getting applications? Are we seeing our force wanting to turn over at all? Are you getting rumblings of that? Because these are just things that you're seeing nationwide, not just in Minneapolis, but I mean all over the country, where police officers are saying, you know what, this is enough, I'm done. I want to make sure that our county is doing enough to be able to keep that turnover at what would be normal turnover levels and recruitment levels as well.
I'll start with retention. We had one or two in the last couple of years that after Ferguson, and they got soured on it. They left. Wasn't for them anymore. A lot of stress, take it home. There's always rumblings, you know, when you have the pendulum swing in what appears to be everyone against law enforcement, though that's not the truth. There's that perception. Always rumblings. I think we're in a good position. I think it goes back to culture. You know, supporting the guys and gals and letting them know that the community does support what they do and that they're needed. Recruitment. Well, we had an interview on the Saturday after George Floyd, and 6 people called and said, nope, not for me. So we were down to 6, 7 in the interview. So it will impact recruitment. There's no question that it will. We were struggling before. We will surely struggle now.
Sheriff, if I could add just a quick comment to that on recruitment. I've been privileged, Supervisor Burning, to sit in on, maybe over the course of the last 2 years, 3 days when I was asked to be part of an interview panel for new recruits to different positions in the Sheriff's Office. And typically we had 8 to 12 interviews. It takes a full day to do it. And my reaction to the whole thing would be, just in about one sentence, I think about half the candidates were absolutely outstanding, just terrific. They had done all the schooling, training, their attitude was great, they had other life experiences that were substantial. Maybe about half of the folks weren't right for that position, but I didn't run across anybody I thought, this is a total, this person shouldn't have applied at all. They might have been too young for the position, but so I think the sheriff has done a great job of trying to get people in through the door. Now, he mentioned that the last time around we had a lot of cancellations just before the interviews, but I know I'm sitting in on some interviews next Wednesday. It'll be interesting to see how that goes, because I think, again, we have about 10 or 12 candidates for a position, and I'd be happy to get back to you, Paul, on my reaction to that as well.
And I think it's important, too, that when we do these hirings, I mean, we look at how many of our deputies have connections to the community, grew up here, graduated here, live here. To be on patrol, you are required to live in the county. The jail staff, not, because they do not have take-home squads, but they're supposed to live within 15 miles of the border. So there has to be some pride and connection in where you work as well, and in your community.
Sheriff, if you've completed your
My diatribe is...
No, your wonderful briefing this morning. I certainly want to express my strong support for what you've been doing, and I'm sure I speak on behalf of the other members of the committee. Are there any other questions from anybody? If not, we'll thank the sheriff, and we'll move to a request for future agenda items. Okay. Any announcements and correspondence? The only thing I would announce is that I think at our last meeting I had mentioned that I was working with the district attorney's office and the judges on a program for September on elder abuse, and we also were working with the HHS committee and the ADRC on that, and it has come along nicely. It looks like we'll have a program either the third week of September or the fourth week of September. That's being finalized. Looks like we'll have representatives from the Department of Justice of Wisconsin, Elder Task Force, from the judges, from the District Attorney's Office, from social workers here in St. Croix County, from the faith community, and the banking community. So it should be a very good, full program to explore various aspects of elder abuse. But again, more official announcement of this will come up probably the end of July when everything is finalized. But that's just an update. Any other
Chair.
comments? Sheriff.
And I apologize, apparently my filibuster is going to continue just a little longer. So obviously we had the unimaginable amount of rain that we had this weekend. 3 a.m. on Monday morning, the communications van was activated, and Terry Anderson, Captain Brent Standard, and Captain Jeff Klatt man that along with a combined command post of fire and EMS on the east end. And those three did a wonderful job of coordinating what a mad scramble it was. I need to recognize, obviously, United Fire, Baldwin, Hammond, Woodville, Roberts EMS, Baldwin EMS, Baldwin PD, our sheriff's deputies, Hudson Fire, River Falls Fire, Somerset Fire, Washington County Dive and Rescue, Wisconsin DNR, Wisconsin State Patrol, the Highway Department, who did a phenomenal job, Public Works out of Baldwin, Woodville, Hammond, Woodville PD, River Falls PD, Amory Fire, obviously all the record services that move quickly to get vehicles pulled from areas, township maintenance crews, St. Croix County Emergency Management, St. Croix County Emergency Communications. It was 6 hours of breakneck speed trying to coordinate rescue efforts. So that group did a good job. So I just wanted to pass that along.
Thank you, Sheriff, for mentioning that. And I know it was very, very hectic for you folks particularly and for the citizens of the county. Are there any other observations from any members of the committee? If there are not, our next meeting is 6 August, and we're adjourned. Thank you.